Today, in the first reading in the Gospel, we get a look at God's perspective, what it is that God sees. Here's the picture presented to us. God creates. He's created all. But specifically, in both, they talk about a vineyard. And in the Gospel it says, he planted the right kinds of vines, he put a hedge around it, he put a wine press in the middle, put a tower up. Everything was just perfect for bringing forth a good harvest. Then he put some tenants in it and says, listen, you work this, you get a really good portion of it, and then I get a portion of it. Deal? Deal. Okay. So, what he does is set things up so that people will get what they need and give back to him what the part that is God's. Think that's a pretty good plan? All right, sure, it's a great plan. But it didn't work out that way. Because the tenants said, well, we not only want what belongs to us, we want what belongs to God. We want it all. And so, when the servants came to collect what belonged to God, they beat them up, they stoned them, they killed them, and they wanted it all for themselves. And Jesus asked, well, what do you think ought to be done? And they said, well, they're going to come to a wretched end. That's what's going to happen. So that's God's plan. And then we see the greed of people, what greed and selfishness does when they don't share the portion that belongs to God with God. And Jesus is directing this parable to the chief priests and the elders, just like last week's, because they are the ones who have been given all of the scriptures up to that point, and they were the ones who were to faithfully from the heart live it out, and in living it out also work for justice, for service to the poor, and all that. And it was directed to them because they were the tenants, and they are the ones who weren't giving back to God what God had given to them. So we can judge that, and rightly so. Read. Okay. Well, today, if we were to apply that parable to ourselves, we are the tenants. God has given us our faith. We have 2,000 years of faith as Christians and Catholics, and plus all of the salvation history in the Old Testament. We have all we have in Scripture, and we have all the tradition of the church and examples and many saints throughout the years and all that. So we have a great tradition and a great gift, a rich gift of faith. Not only that, we look around and we live in the United States. Now there's a lot you can be said for and against it, but let's just say this much. We live a pretty good life compared to so many people in the world. Even those who don't have much, even those who don't have much in our nation have so much more than the poorest in the world. I've been there, I've seen it. We have so much there. And for that, we can well be grateful. Thanks be to God that we have so much. And we look at it and it's like, well, we have bigger homes today for fewer people than when I grew up. There are 10 of us in a 3-bedroom home, plus my parents. Like, I don't know about you, but there's a whole lot more room in houses today with fewer people in them. So, we can well be grateful for all that we have. Not only can we be grateful, we also need to know that we are accountable for what we have. What all that is given, we are accountable to give God his portion back when the servants come to collect it. Okay, I just want you to know that I'm not into guilt, okay? And anything I say is not intended to be guilt-producing. If it ends up being that way, I sure hope it isn't coming from me. Okay. Where was it? All right. Here's where I was. God's servants come to collect them. Have you met these servants? Those who come to collect what belongs to God? Have you met them? Don't know, huh? Well, I'm going to suggest that every one of us has met those servants who come to collect what belongs to God, because God sends them into our lives to collect from us what they need to live their lives. So, it could well be your neighbor who has come to ask for something of what they need that we have. It could be your spouse. It could be your children. It could be your parents. It could be that person at work that you like. It could be that person at work that you don't like. It could be somebody we don't even know who comes to say, I need some help. I need some of your precious time. And isn't time one of the most precious things we have? We only got a certain amount. We don't know how much. We only got a certain amount. And the question is, how are we going to spend it? And somebody wants our time. How much of that belongs to God? And to whom we can give it through the servant. Or how much of it of our own material possessions? How much of it do we have that we don't need and somebody else does? This parable is saying, if you got something you don't need and you're not using, give it away to somebody who does need it. Or am I making this up? Think I'm making this up? All right. So I kind of scratch my head sometimes when I think, what are all those storage bins doing around here? Or like we got to build more storage space in our homes for things we don't use. And I read something several months ago where it says that 40% of the food that is produced in the United States is thrown away. Wow. Again, I'm not into guilt. I'm just saying, God has a right to hold us accountable for what we have. And on this Respect Life Sunday, also going to talk about helping, other kinds of organizations which do more than any one person can. The last 3 years I've gone to the Robbinsdale Women's Center banquet, money-raising banquet. And every time, part of the program is that they bring a mother up who has decided to keep her child. So sometimes it's a little baby and sometimes it's a teenager. They come up and they talk about how much difference that made in her life to save her baby and to have it come to fruition, to come to life. And they ask us, will you support that? Now, as a Franciscan, I do my part, I do my part to do that. Some of what I have belongs to God, and I do. But we are all asked to support life in one way or another, from conception to natural death. We're all asked to do that, and God has a right to it. We're accountable for it. Out of gratitude, I have this, and I need to give it. Kind of reminds me of another story I read about Mother Teresa. And it's written by somebody named Shane Claiborne, who worked with Mother Teresa. So he wrote this in his book. He said, people often ask me what Mother Teresa was like. Sometimes it's like they wonder if she glowed in the dark and had a halo. She was short, wrinkled, and precious, maybe even a little ornery, like a beautiful, wise, old granny. But there is one thing I will never forget: her feet. Her feet were deformed. Each morning in Mass, I would stare at them. I wondered if she had contracted leprosy. But I wasn't going to ask, of course, "Hey, Mother, what's wrong with your feet?" So, one day a sister said to us, "Have you noticed your feet?" We nodded, curious. She said, "Her feet are deformed because we get just enough donated shoes for everyone, and Mother does not want anyone to get stuck with the worst pair. So she digs through them and finds them and wears them herself. And years of doing that have deformed her feet. Years of loving her neighbor as herself deformed her feet." Mother Teresa is giving out of her want, out of her need. And out of gratitude, I would hope that we are learning how to give at least out of our abundance, much less out of stretching that far to give out of our need. So, the parable is before us. God has created the vineyard. We're the tenants. We're still on the way. He's asking us to take what is ours and to give what belongs to God back to God through His people and through His church. Does God have a right to hold us accountable?